This is Breaking the News Plus. I'm Janice Shortle. It was an eventful Monday morning if you follow the federal courts here in Minnesota, because the chief federal judge in our state just smacked down the Department of Justice's subpoenas against a lot of high-ranking officials in our state. Just blocked them altogether. And Lou Raguse has been following this both on the paper trail, in the courtroom, and in person with folks. So, Lou, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Lou, let's just get this going. Minnesota's chief federal judge, U.S. District Judge Patrick Schilz, ruled that the U.S. Department of Justice's subpoenas were politically motivated, unconstitutional, and without merit. I am being told by people in power that this is a big darn deal. Yes.
And so to first take the big view here, this is back in January during Operation Metro Surge. These subpoenas were handed out as part of what the end game here would be to charge Governor Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and potentially others with a crime. This was a criminal investigation that the U.S. Department of Justice was trying to initiate, with the allegations being that they were conspiring to impede with the federal investigation, the ICE operations in Minneapolis and in Minnesota during this winter.
And they served subpoenas wanting records, text messages, emails, everything from those elected officials to show what they believed that they were involved in.
But a subpoena is a way to force them to hand over evidence even if they don't want to. And so it would include like communications, right, like emails being sent, any sort of records in the office. It would have been a big, huge undertaking to do in the first place. And it's part of a grand jury investigation, which means that they would get this evidence and they would present it to a grand jury and have some witnesses, and then they would ask a grand jury to indict. That's how the process would play out. However, grand juries operate in secret, so we didn't really know. None of this information was public. The mayor posted his subpoena on social media.
Mayor Jacob Frey.
Yes. And then others, did as well. And so we knew more than you usually know,
right, because
of that. But we didn't know the background, how they were fighting the legality of it.
Of this request, or not even a request, of these subpoenas. And so now we get to June, almost 6 months later, or exactly 6 months later, and the U.S. District Judge here, Patrick Schilz, says, no, these are politically motivated, unconstitutional, and without merit. So he blocked all of these subpoenas. And before we go further, I want to point out to people watching who this judge actually is. He is an appointee of George W. Bush. He is a conservative judge, and he clerked for the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He was also a mentor to Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett.
Yes, and if you talk to lawyers here in Minnesota, they will tell you that he is a bona fide conservative. And if there is a campaign, and there is already on social media, to paint him as an activist liberal judge, that is not true.
Right.
But one thing I will say is that he takes great offense to people that try to circumvent the judiciary or use the courts for purposes other than they're supposed to be used.
And that comes pretty clear in his language. He's saying that the DOJ basically weaponized these kinds of things against these elected officials, taking out grievances for things they may have said, or wanted them to go along with Operation Metro Surge, what they didn't and didn't legally have to do. And so now, in legal terms, kind of explain to folks how he came to this opinion to say no to these subpoenas, that they're unlawful.
Well, first of all, there has to be a purpose to serve. And so there has to be some sort of suspicion as to why you want to launch an investigation. You can't just launch an investigation on someone for no reason.
Okay.
And so as they were fighting in the courts in secret, because it was all sealed up to this point, he asked the DOJ to provide examples of suspicious behavior or suspicious acts, why you should be allowed to have these subpoenas.
Acts by Jacob Frey, Governor Walz, AG Ellison, St. Paul Mayor Khalil.
That would be what he's asking for, but that's not what they provided. They provided some examples of some city council members making statements. 2 different Minneapolis city council members, talking about, if anyone hears of ICE activity, they should be required to report it to the city council. And so the problem here is that none of these subpoenas had anything to do with the Minneapolis City Council.
Right.
There was another example that had to do with the Hennepin County Board saying something similar, someone on the board saying something similar. And so that's what the DOJ brought forth as like their proof.
Okay.
And Schilz was not impressed at all. And so just to read a couple direct quotes from it, He said that initiating a criminal investigation in order to harass political opponents or to coerce them into taking official action is blatantly unlawful and unethical use of the grand jury process. And so attorneys in Minnesota, for example, have to pass the bar.
Right.
And so when you start using the word unethical, when a judge uses that, it's kind of a warning sign like, hey, you can't be doing stuff like this moving forward, or it could affect your law license. Unethical things get investigated by the state bar, and it could affect your law license.
That goes back to your previous point about the judge. He does not like to see the judiciary weaponized.
We talked about Judge Schilz a few months ago when the church protests happened at City's Church in St. Paul, and they really wanted to indict, or before the indictment, they wanted to get a complaint filed to charge Don Lemon, before they took it to a grand jury. And it got rejected by the judge that they asked for, so they appealed it up the chain. Judge Schilz is the chief judge, and he looked at it and he said, "You're misusing your role here."
Okay.
And he said, "I'm not going to sign off on this."
Okay.
So there's kind of this precedence of him looking at something as like, this looks like a political prosecution rather than something based on the facts, and I'm going to say no, I'm going to reject it. And that's exactly what he did in this case.
So does this mean that the Department of Justice just has to end it? Like with this ruling from the federal judge, from Judge Schilz, do they have to stop going after the names that were gone after in these subpoenas? Does it end it here, or do they have some recourse? Can the DOJ say, I think you're wrong, Judge, and I want to take this one step further?
Well, so broadly, the answer is no, it doesn't completely end it. It just depends on how determined they are. I don't know the answer to, how they can try to go above Judge Schiltz's head in order to try to get them. Judge Schilz is highly respected at the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, and so his rulings have a lot of standing if things get brought to the appeals court. Not even sure if that's an option here.
Okay.
But there have been other cases where they failed, but they were so determined that they found a way to charge anyway. But it's a bad sign for the ultimate success of any prosecution if you can't even get authorization for your grand jury subpoenas at the very beginning.
Now,
like the likelihood, even if they found a way to charge, this dramatically lessens the likelihood of convicting eventually any of these officials.
And there was some speculation in January when these subpoenas came out, late January, from people in the legal world here in Minnesota and across the country that cast some pretty significant skepticism on this attempt by the DOJ in the first place. Did basically that skepticism kind of come to be true with what we've seen and how the judge has ruled today? Yeah,
entirely, because Judge Schilz lays out the timeline, and the timeline is the timeline that we already know that has to do with Operation Metro Surge starting, some of the civilians that were killed along the way, Minnesota filing a lawsuit trying to stop it, and then this social media post by President Trump that said to the great people of Minnesota, the day of reckoning and retribution is coming. That Judge Schilz says that's a clear, obvious, and direct warning that there's going to be consequences for your failing to comply with what we're trying to do here. And then just days later, these subpoenas were issued. And so when you follow the timeline, Judge Schilz lays it out. He says he has no doubt that these subpoenas were issued for forbidden purposes. He said that the evidence that the challenge subpoenas were issued for unlawful reasons is overwhelming.
What does that read to you in layman's terms?
It means that you were trying to break the law.
The Department of Justice was trying to break the law?
The Department of Justice, the federal government was trying to break the law in order to charge local and state officials in Minnesota.
That's a bold statement.
It is.
And so I know you had the chance to talk to some of the people that were subpoenaed today, the mayor, the attorney general, and you probably spoke to some legal experts. What's their reaction to this? So
Mayor Fry, he said that he never for a second thought that the facts were not on their side. He wasn't worried that they were wrong. But at the same time, he acknowledged how disconcerting it is to be targeted for a crime.
Right.
And to know that you're under a criminal investigation, is stressful.
Sure.
That was kind of his reaction, was that he's relieved after this. And Attorney General Keith Ellison was very similar, and he added a lot of statements about, that if you want to beat me at the ballot box. Don't try to, if you don't like the way that we do our politics. Don't try to put me in jail. Try to beat me at the ballot box. That was kind of the message from Attorney General Keith Ellison.
Okay.
And then from the legal experts, I mean, they just continue to be blown away by these rulings and how forceful and direct they are from this chief judge, who is, by all accounts, a conservative judge in the liberal state of Minnesota.
And it's worth noting, too, for folks watching that are thinking about Operation Metro Surge, and maybe you're on this side of thinking, hey, our elected officials in Minnesota, from the governor on down to the mayors in the Twin Cities, should have just done whatever the federal government wanted them to do. And that's a fine thing to think. But when you talk about it from a legal perspective, I want to read something that the judge said in his opinion. He noted that by initiating a criminal investigation, which is what happened through these subpoenas, it was in order to harass political opponents or to coerce them into taking official action, particularly official action that the federal government cannot directly require those political opponents to take. They are not required, the mayors or the governor, to work with the federal government on immigration enforcement. That's just not a thing.
There's a constitutional reason that he gave for denying these, and it's that the federal government cannot commandeer states to do exactly what they want them to do. They can't force states to do their bidding. Mm-hmm. It's the separation of the federal government and state and local governments. And so essentially he's saying that's what they were trying to do through the use of coercion and so forth, is like force you to do our work.
Right.
And that's exactly what's written into our Constitution that the federal government cannot do.
Right. In the 10th Amendment, Judge Schilz wrote in this document that the justification by the Department of Justice for these subpoenas is risible, which means laughable. And he found that the subpoenas violated the 10th Amendment, which prohibits the federal government from forcing states to enforce federal law and from retaliating against state officials for refusing to do so.
Right.
It's written right there in the 10th Amendment.
Yep. And that also was the basis of some of the other lawsuits that never reached the end along the way. Is, when they were trying to put an end to Metro Surge, the state of Minnesota sued the federal government, and they used that same argument, but it kind of became a moot point when the operation ended.
Okay.
So we never got there. I talked about it in one of the stories I did on those lawsuits. But here, it's like, this was an ongoing criminal investigation that was going to have an end, and the judge stopped it at this point because it is unconstitutional.
The judge said in his opinion that it is a blatantly and unlawful. It is a blatantly unlawful and unethical use of the grand jury process, and you said that as well. Does that have any, scent of could there be repercussions for the DOJ for even bringing it if he calls it those kinds of things? You talk about bar licenses and stuff like that. Is that a threat? Or he's just pointing out, do not do this again?
I think it is a threat. And that I think that because my legal experts told me, it's a shot across the bow.
Okay.
It's a threat. It's saying, hey, stand down, or even maybe to the local U.S. Attorney's office here, like, hey, if you're getting these top-down directives from the Department of Justice to do a political prosecution, think about it long and hard, because there are other repercussions for you as a member of the legal community in the state of Minnesota.
That's interesting because as we covered last week, new charges brought against 15 protesters in Minnesota. It's interesting to think about this in its totality, this kind of warning shot too. Like before you file charges or make an allegation with charges, understand that you better have the evidence to back that up, right?
Yes, because I mean, people have to understand that the way that federal court usually goes and the way that a federal indictment is usually seen is that they've got the goods on you. Like cases can go on for a long time without ever a charge coming because they don't know for sure that they're going to win yet.
Okay.
And so that is maybe the difference of a federal indictment versus charges in other jurisdictions, is that when the federal indictment comes down, it's like they're not just throwing a dart at the wall here.
Okay.
They've got the goods.
They've got the goods.
And that, I think judges like Judge Schilz, they see kind of a change in that, and rulings like this are their attempt to try to stop that.
Right. No, don't come to us until you got the goods.
Yeah.
The way it's supposed to go.
Exactly.
Well, this is something to digest. I know that it's a 29-page ruling, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, but it's an easy read.
It's an easy read.
Compared to other legal things that we go through, this is one that I think a layperson can read through and get a lot out of, actually. It's worth taking a look at.
It's definitely worth taking a look at as you try to understand the totality of Operation Metro Surge and what's happening now for the things that we saw happen in those tense moments in January. That's all for us tonight. Thank you so much, Lou, for joining us yet again.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for Breaking the News Plus. I'm Jana Shortle. We'll see you next time. Take care.